Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar. This month is Firefighter Cancer Awareness Month, and firefighters need to know how and where they are exposed to carcinogens in order to take the necessary steps to mitigate occupational cancer risks. It takes a multi-pronged approach, both on and off the fire ground, to lessen the risk and protect firefighters from critical illness such as cancer. I'm pleased to be able to facilitate today's important discussion with some very good friends of mine, and I consider them all experts: Sarah Jenke, Rick Markley, Judith Graber, and Ray Lankin. For this discussion, how to incorporate life-saving practices into your daily routines in order to reduce your exposure risk and protect yourselves and your fellow firefighters from occupational cancer. Each of us today are very familiar with the issues that firefighters face with cancer in the protection of their communities. Since 2014, the United States Fire Service, along with researchers and strategists, have been spending many hours on research, writing documents, embedding proactive measures within their daily work activities just to lessen the impact of cancer, not only on the firefighter, but on their families as well. With that being said, we'd like to take a moment and thank our partners at UDS for sponsoring today's webinar and joining us in today's conversation. Without further ado, let's go ahead and meet our panelists so that they can share their background as it relates to today's topic. And we'll start with Judith Graber. Judith?
Thank you so much. You want me to just introduce myself?
Absolutely. Give a little background of yourself.
Absolutely. So I'm at Rutgers University, where I'm on faculty in the Department of Epidemiology. I've been working with firefighters and first responders for a little more than a decade. I'm a co-investigator on the firefighter cancer cohort study. And in that study, I work within the Cancer Assessment and Prevention Study, or CAPS. And our job is to work with volunteer firefighters and to engage them in this important research about cancer assessment and prevention. So excited to be here on the panel today. Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to the discussion.
And we're excited to have you, Judith. How about Ray Lankin?
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me. My name is Ray Lincoln. I'm the CEO of United Diagnostic Services. And just like a lot of families in a firefighter community, cancer devastated my family. My mom.
We lost Ray a little bit. And we're going to go, we're going to skip Ray a little bit. We're going to go to Rick Markley. Rick, you want to pick up the slack here?
Absolutely. Hi, Rick Markley here. I am a paid-on-call firefighter and EMT. I am executive editor of Crackle Magazine, and probably most important to this discussion, I'm working with NIOSH to help them promote the National Firefighter Registry for Cancer to the non-career firefighting sector.
Very good. Thanks again for being with us today, Rick. And last but not least, our good friend, Sarah Jenke.
Hello, Sarah Jenke. What you just said, I direct the Center for Fire Rescue and EMS Health Research, and then also run Science to the Station, a health and wellness alliance looking at translating science to practice. Do research. I'm on, work with Judith on the FFCCS as a co-lead, and then work with Rick on the advisory panel for the National Firefighter Registry. And I'm just really excited to be on this and to have some conversations about volunteer fire service and firefighters in general, and what risks you face, and all the good bad things, I guess. So thanks for having me on.
It's so important that the melting pot, let's say, of people that we put together today are going to share so many different varieties of research and knowledge to help not only the volunteer but the career firefighters as well. And we're going to start with some questions for Judith. We're going to start with you first. Thinking about cancer prevention recommendation from the Lavender River Report, what are some of the unique challenges you see that the volunteer firefighters face in the implementation of the 11 best practices that we have in the Lavender River Report?
Thanks so much, Brian. That's such a great question. And, such a groundbreaking report to be aimed at volunteer firefighters with specific recommendations for volunteers to reduce cancer. As I'm out in the field talking with volunteer firefighters, the things that I hear really range depending on the fire department's resources and the firefighters' time and resources. And so we see many, many fire stations, for example, in the volunteer sector that don't have a shower in the station, which makes it really hard to take a shower within an hour, which is one of the recommendations. And then we see other stations that have shower facilities, but their volunteers don't have the time. And I think this is just a great example because you can think about, so how can you translate that, right? What can volunteers do with limited time? And we've been talking about ideas like making pledges about how to get to that shower before you get home, right? How to protect yourself and your family. Similarly, we see stations that don't have facilities to clean their gear. Many of the volunteers we see I don't have yet to be in a department where each volunteer has a second set of gear. Most of them then that don't have a second set will have gear that's designated to them as needed. You get fit problems there, particularly with women firefighters. So really what I see out there is I see resources both from the fire department and then from the volunteers, because when you're running out to a call and you've got to get back to work, or you want to get home for that 1 hour of sleep before you go to work or get the kids to school. I think those are I think it's important to be looking at it from both ends. What are the issues we see from the fire department end, and what are the issues we see from the individual firefighter end, and how do we bring those together? And then, so importantly, in the Lavender report recommendations, are those behavior recommendations, the tobacco use, the seeing your clinician, and getting cancer screening. I think the other thing that we see with volunteers that's unique to volunteers is volunteers have to tell their clinician, their healthcare provider, that they are firefighters. And so for me, it is that kind of spectrum of issues that we see in the volunteer sector.
So it looks like, I mean, no matter whether you're from a smaller department of 18 to 20 volunteer firefighters to one of 50 to 56 volunteers, it just seems like, we understand that they have the Lavender River report. We have the 11 best practices. The Firefighter Cancer Support Network shares the same messages. Is that we just find that I think it's how well we stay on top of it and how well we, make it work for our department, that's really going to protect our firefighters. I have another question for you. What are the challenges to all the firefighters in reducing behavior risk associated with cancer? And let's think of some like alcohol consumption or sleep disruption, shift work, the smokeless tobacco use, the increase in the vaping issues that we're seeing amongst firefighters.
So I'm going to start that, then I'm going to pass it to Sarah here. But, I think, and really to come off what you were saying before, I agree that there are issues from our smallest department. I mean, we've got one department in Tennessee that has 5 members who's in the departments in our study. We've got a department in New Jersey that has pushing 300. And we do see issues, but they're very different. And also, I think the knowledge issues are different. And so, whereas knowledge itself isn't going to make these changes happen, you can't make the changes if you don't know, what you need to know. And I think that's the beginning also with the behavioral change. Cancer doesn't come from one thing. The vast majority of cases of cancer are an accumulation of insults to your body, whether it's those exposures from your firefighting, those carcinogenic exposures from the fire itself, or alcohol use or tobacco use. And, alcohol and tobacco are so very important because in the general population, so among people that don't have firefighting exposures, those are the 2 most preventable causes of cancer. And I think that a lot of people don't realize that alcohol is now recognized as a really important cause of many types of cancer, including some of the cancers that firefighters are at excess risk for, like colon cancer. And so I think that, again, it's what does the firefighter do and what does the fire department do? The biggest issue, I think, just like We talk about cool needing to be clean now. It's the same thing with the behavioral changes, right? We have, thank goodness, it's no longer acceptable to smoke tobacco in fire stations. That's great. We need to move that to a whole tobacco. A lot of firefighters who don't smoke but had used tobacco or want to use tobacco, they chew. Chewing tobacco puts you at risk for other cancers like pancreatic cancer, like head and neck cancer. So there's, I think, developing that culture where firefighters and their departments work together and provide opportunities and time, right, for those changes is so important. If you don't mind, I'd like to pass that to Sarah.
Oh,
Because
I
you're
think that we could be able to do that.
because you're talking about all the things, all my favorite things to research. You know, and I do think I think there's a lot about being a firefighter that pulls for unhealthy behaviors. And I think it's harder to be healthy as a firefighter. I mean, I've had people argue with me, oh, everyone has individual choices. Absolutely, everyone has individual choices. I 100% believe, you have to be in control of your own health choices. But I also think that we know that there are environments that pull for unhealthy behaviors. And I think all of those are so closely interconnected for the fire service. And it's not, everything from kind of the peer pressure or food availability at the firehouse. I mean, how many times do you get together for a department dinner and everyone's having like chicken and vegetables? For a number of reasons, that's not standard fare. It's pizza and spaghetti dinners and those types of things for a lot of different reasons. But I think there are also all those things are so closely tied. And I used to say it's, firefighters, general population, it's harder for firefighters to be healthy. And I actually think that it's even harder for volunteer firefighters. The work that I've done, when I'm out firehouses, when the volunteer firehouses, like it's second and third jobs for folks who are already, so people are already time strapped, money strapped, like, and this is so the last thing that they need is okay, we also have one more commitment for the department. But it's also so interrelated, right? And so if you look at alcohol use, we know from the data that alcohol use is related to everything from overweight and obesity to mental health. And it's, it's a chicken and the egg. Is that, people are people using alcohol to cope? There are a lot of social norms around alcohol use in the fire service. We know on average when firefighters drink, about half of volunteers have binged in the last month. That's consistent across studies. Judith is finding the same stuff. We know that when they drink, they're drinking 3.5, which is where 3.5 drinks, which is where you start to see increases for cancer. And is that a response to mental health? Is that being used as a coping mechanism, or is, if you're using that as a coping mechanism, or you're not using other things and building other resilience, healthier resilience avenues. So those are all interconnected. And then you layer that with, if you're drinking a Big Mac's worth of calories, which is on average what people are drinking when they're drinking, you're drinking that on top of the things that you're eating, and maybe, it just all plays together. And volunteer fire service sees a lot of things. Anyone who runs into this space, fire and EMS, you're you're going to see traumatic things. But for volunteers, I think we've got a whole nother level, particularly in rural settings. Volunteers will talk to me about, like, you hear truck off the side of the road, you're thinking, who do I know that might be coming home in that route? Who am I going to see? And because it's probably going to be someone I know. So it's also interrelated. I think we have some reproductive health data that suggests rates of some of those issues are even higher in volunteers. And I think probably, while we don't have the data for it yet, and I'm going to look at Rick to talk about how we're going to get that data at the NFR, but I think we've underestimated the risk of the volunteer fire service. The good news is these are mostly things that can be addressed, and I think we spend a lot of time, and I'm all for gross decon of the fire grant, I'm all for shower within the hour, but there's the carcinogen exposures are just such a small piece. Sleep, how sleep interact, like all of it, it's mind-blowing. But it is all so interrelated. And then the good news is once we start affecting one, we affect them all.
And, if I can jump in for a second, the
Excellent.
other thing that's happening in the
Absolutely. Yeah,
non-career
Rick,
volunteer
please.
sector. Sorry, Brian, I didn't mean to step on you. The other thing that's really
Go ahead.
happening is that
Please jump in.
we have a resource deficit in terms of non-career firefighters. You know, there's often not a human resources department in volunteer departments. There's some EAP programs, but not a lot. So they're really relying on their primary employer for such things, and that's not going to always translate to the fire service the way that a career department's going to. So, you know, we're kind of getting a double-barreled whammy there.
I mean,
Rick, I've got another question that came in for you as well. So, does anyone have any comments about the lack of reporting as it is set out in NFPA? In other words, does anyone think that there is a link to the lack of report of exposures that have an effect on illnesses that firefighters are getting? Anybody want to jump on that one?
Sure. I can jump in here, and um, there's a lot there's a lot of information that's available to us since 2022, specifically to exposure and behavior issues as well. We're based on early detection program on two of the World Health Organization reports and American Cancer Society reports. So I'm sure that a lot of folks in the volunteer community have seen the monograph report from World Health Organization, where in 2022, the Ivy League physician that's been working on cancer risk specifically has to do with carcinogens exposure in the fire service. They collected sufficient amount of evidence to classify occupational exposure as a firefighter being carcinogenic to humans, and they moved it to Group 1 category, and they listed evidence of exposure, toxic agents, fire structures, and most importantly for us as a diagnostic team, they listed organs that specifically high risk for cancer if you're a firefighter, and those organs are bladder, prostate, testicular, skin, not Hodgkin's lymphoma, colon, and other. So I don't think there's a lack of information out there, specifically after World Health Organization, their Department on International Agency of Research on Cancer came out when they specifically look at the firefighters' exposure versus organs that are high risk for cancer. And also, I want to touch a little bit on what Sarah was saying. American Cancer Society started looking into the cancer risk in the fire service, and they also came up with educational narrative that's they made public. And I encourage everyone on this call to look into American Cancer Society research in the fire service, and they're describing behavior issues that cause cancer, and such as 1 in 5 cancer causes are due to, just like the previous speaker said, excess body weight, poor nutrition, physical inactivity, and excessive alcohol consumption. And now, if you look, as for us as a diagnostic team, it's so important to be very specific to the firefighter abnormalities and to the organs that are high risk for cancer and other pathologies when we deploy these services. So really, if you combine two reports together, World Health Organization report, American Cancer Society report, you see that almost every organ and body parts are high risk for cancer, specifically if you're a firefighter.
Thanks, Ray. Judy, go ahead.
Thanks so much. Yeah, Ray, thanks so much for bringing up the International Agency for Research on Cancer Review. And for folks who aren't familiar with IARC, they're an agency of the World Health Organization. And what they do is they evaluate things to see if they cause cancer in humans. And as Ray said, they first evaluated it in 2010, and they said, maybe. And then they reevaluated with a working group of 25 scientists from 8 countries, and I was honored to be part of that, in 2022, and they evaluated the evidence. And what they do is they look at all the science in humans, so firefighters, and I'll tell you, most of that science has been done in career firefighters to date. I'll come back to that in a second. Then all the stuff about mechanism, you know, what are the things that it is that changes in our bodies when we're exposed? How does our DNA change that might increase our risk for cancer? And then they bring that and they look at the different ways the firefighters are exposed, and they bring those 3 different streams of evidence together and make that determination. And as Ray said, you know, they changed their determination from probably, maybe, to yes. Occupation as a firefighter increases a person's risk for cancer. And, you know, what importantly they said is that it applies to everybody. all firefighters. Even though the research is primarily from career firefighters, it applies to volunteer firefighters, to WUI, to anyone that has these occupational exposures. An occupation being meaning that you go out and you do firefighting. I do think, Ray, that it opens up a lot of questions. It answers one question that isn't really news to the fire service, but what it does is it provides us with a lot of questions that haven't been answered. What are volunteer risks? How are they similar and different from career risks? I think some of the things we've been saying, they're different. I don't think there's any less risk. I just think they may be different. As Sarah's saying, some of those behavioral factors may be stronger. And in our work with the firefighter cancer cohort study, we're starting to compare sort of some volunteer and career firefighters and look at how those risks may differ. How do their exposures differ? We know that many volunteers, not all, many volunteers go out on less calls a month, right? But we also know they stay longer on their calls. They may have less protection on their calls. They may have less rehab or no rehab. They may not have as much post-exposure cleanup. So those are the things that I think are such important questions to be answering right now. And I think also, you know, the NFR is another way that we're really going to get at those questions. And so exciting that the NFR is launched and that Rick, you're doing outreach specifically to the volunteer community.
You know, you bring up some great points, especially about the NFR. You know, it is a great tool. I sat on that planning committee for 5 years, and you know, now we just have to take that initiative and make sure that it is a good thing. We have to sell it. Our leadership has to sell it as well, and that's why we need to continue to fight. You know, fight this cancer issue amongst the fire service in the United States. You know, Ray, you brought up you know, some great ideas also about early detection programs. What are some early detection programs, and why are they essential to a volunteer fire service or fire department?
It's a great question, Brian. And you know, I just want everyone to know that early detection programs are available to volunteer fire departments in New York State and nationwide. There's diagnostic tools that we mobilize that is traditional gold standard diagnostic modalities that potentially can detect cancer in the early stage. And I tell you, specifically what we do, our gold standard diagnostic program is 9 solid organ body part ultrasound screening. When we take solid organs and deploy ultrasound modality to look at potentially actionable pathologies, occupational cancer, and of course, cardiovascular disease as well. Really the mission of this program that we deploy and that we successfully done it with volunteer fire department is to make preventive screenings affordable, available, and accessible to every volunteer department in New York State and in the nation as well. And specifically ultrasound, and we can custom build any other programs, including blood and mobilize computed tomography, such as CT for long screening, but specifically with ultrasound. Why ultrasound is one of the gold standard diagnostic tools? Because it produces images. Well, first of all, it uses sound waves to produce images. Number one, high frequency sound waves. Another really important thing that is that no radiation. It produces images real time, meaning we can look at the pathology right then and there. And of course, it's very portable. We're able to mobilize it into a comfort of any fire stations, community centers, or any other facilities that made available for us. And early detection is the key because we're able to mobilize this traditional gold standard diagnostic modalities, bring it on site, and detect this pathologies early. Even though ultrasound might not confirm cancer, it can trigger an abnormality that's after the follow-up with primary care physician and after further testing of blood or any advanced diagnostic imaging can reveal that individual is facing with stage 1 cancer. And of course, you know, if we detect cancer early, the chance of survival goes all the way on average to 95%, and survival rate of the cancer that detected late usually drops significantly. Obviously, by the time individuals diagnosed, they're already in stage 4 of disease progression. And just to give you some statistics, we've mobilized the services to 4 corners of the United States. We visited over 140 departments in the last 6 months. In the last 6 months, we've detected 28 cases of cancer, all in the early stage. Every single case that we detected were detected early. Individuals had all the time for immediate biopsies, immediate surgeries. They're in remission, back to light duty, or back to work right now. All because we're bringing gold standard diagnostic modalities on site. And by the way, West Islip Volunteer Department was the first volunteer department in New York State that hosted this program back in 2022 and continuously to 2023. And from the very first screening that we performed was 125 individuals. So really an average kind of screening. We've detected 2 cases of cancer, one in thyroid and one in bladder. Okay. So, and the list goes on. I mean, through ultrasound program, the most common cancers that we detect are thyroid, bladder, testicular, kidney, and other.
Looking forward to this in the future, what improvements or expansions are planned for these programs?
We are, as I mentioned, our goal is to cover as many organs as we can with gold standard diagnostic modalities. So for 2023, we deploying ultrasound together with comprehensive blood panel, where we can include PSA and other testing as well. And also our one of the advanced diagnostic imaging is being deployed into the fire departments as well, where we do long screening utilizing computer tomography, utilizing CAT scan, low dose chest CT scan. So that's our expansion plans for 2024.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. Rick, we're starting to get some feedback, also some questions in regards to the NFR, but can you share, the impact of what the National Fire Reporting System is going to have for on the cancer issue, and why are volunteers so hard to research?
Well, I don't fully want to step on Judith's take on why they're so hard to research, because she's as deep in the weeds as anybody is on this. But, just logistically, career firefighters are just easier to reach and get to because their schedules are so much more predictable. Non-career, whether it's part-time, paid on call, pure volunteer, whatever the matrix, the mix might be, we're kind of all over the map, and that makes us harder to get to, but it doesn't make our data any less valuable. In fact, arguably maybe more valuable, because we don't know what we have out there. And we've witnessed it, Brian, that as we've built up the National Firefighter Registry, there was a lot of excitement going into it, and it's been fully activated. I mean, we kicked off last year at this time at FDSOA in Florida with a dry run, and then at FDIC in April we launched it fully to the public. And while we've got 10,000 people signed up, that's a good number, but it's not the number that we were hoping for, right? And again, and of that 10,000, almost 10,000, about 30% of that is volunteer, or in some way a volunteer. And that number's probably artificially a little bit low, because people who are two-hatters might be identifying as a career firefighter and yet still doing volunteer or some kind of paid on call work. So we've got a long way to go, and it's reflective of the culture, right? Everybody wants one pill, one solution to get it done, but it's really a long, sustained process, and that's what this research project is going to be, a long, sustained process, and getting people on board is also part of that process.
There's been some questions also about the data collection and things like that, and the NFIRS also has a system. I think Sarah sent a link to it as well, but also the Firefighter Cancer Network at the University of Miami also has a program where you can track your exposures, and also has some resources in there as well. So, Rick, you brought up some great points about research, and why does research data matter in terms of developing a policy or best practices? And I'm going to throw out one reason. We're looking at developing some type of legislation here for volunteers in New York State, where We want to get early screening on our volunteer firefighters upon entry and throughout the volunteer fire service. So how important is that early screening? And, I can talk to either any one of you about it, but, why should we screen firefighters upon entry into the fire service? Very simple question, and I don't care who answers it.
Um, screening recruits is becoming a very a go-to model for a lot of volunteer fire services, because we were able, with blood or ultrasound, we were able to provide a baseline of health conditions for the individuals that come on board or join the department. And then later on, as this reoccurring events still in place for the department as far as early detection programs, that baseline can be potentially used as any other pathologies, newly acute pathologies appear themselves, specifically for the individual. So I guess the baseline is number one goal for the department, for the individuals who's joining.
Can I jump in for a second? I think the other thing that's really
Thank you.
Thank you, is to talk about all the different things we're talking about, right? We've got the National Registry for Firefighters, we've got some research studies, we've got screening, and we've got M4s, and they are all so important and they all overlap, right? And I think one of the things that's hard for volunteers is knowing what to do when. So N4s and the tool that University of Miami has, those are tools for you as volunteers to use to track your personal exposure. You can think of those as just keeping track for yourself. If you ever, let's hope not, need to go for a presumption, though, you've got that information. You can also use that information if you're going if you're registering for the National Registry, National Firefighter Registry for Cancer, because then you've got your exposure information. You can just plop it right in or share it with some researchers if you're in a study. The beautiful thing about the National Firefighter Registry is it is supported by the government, so the funds are there. It's going to keep going. They'll be doing follow-up. They're going to enroll 200,000 firefighters, and they're going to be able to answer some questions about causes of cancer and types of cancer among subgroups of firefighters that nobody else is going to be able to answer. That survey is fantastic. It's a lot shorter than some of those research studies out there. And I think that getting the message out to volunteers that they can do that as well as any study they're in is really important, and that those studies complement each other. So, for example, as a co-investigator on the National Firefighter Cancer Cohort Study, we are really focused on some of those early mechanisms of what causes cancer, right? And we're looking to enroll 10,000 people because the questions are very different. We said cancer is a very complicated disease and multifactorial disease, and you have to look at all these different pieces to understand how to do across-the-board prevention, right? So I think the important thing for the fire service is what pieces go where, and that anything you can do around the research really moves the cancer prevention forward. Right. And the national, the nice other really wonderful thing about the National Registry for Firefighters is that anyone can do it. And some studies have to restrict the number of people they have in. There's not really a restriction on the NFR. So really encourage everyone. I posted the website, take a look at it, and I'm sure Rick has a lot more to say. I don't mean to step on your toes with Rick, but I think we're all just so excited about this effort.
And the only thing I would add to what Judith said
Rick,
is
you
that
want to add anything?
it is congressionally funded and congressionally mandated right now. But as we know, funding is subject to popular opinion. And so if the fire service doesn't embrace the firefighter registry and use it, I think we run the risk of the funding going away at some point. We need to show that we care about this as much in practice as we do in theory, and get to that 200,000 number. And again, once we start collecting the data and doing the research, then we'll be able to show without argument the connections between firefighting and cancer. And I think that's going to be hugely important to the fire service moving forward.
Brian, can I add to that?
Rick, everybody, go ahead, sir. Sorry.
So, sorry, I don't want to interrupt, but I did mean to interrupt, but not interrupt you. I it's just, I think that we need to have some conversations around volunteers in particular for this, because you asked how hard it is to research volunteers, and it is 20 times harder than it is for career departments. Someone said when we first started really like digging in, most research has happened in the last 15 to 20 years. When you look at firefighter health research, about 80% of it has been since FEMA started funding research. They said, we're not even starting with low-hanging fruit. We're picking up the rotting fruit off the ground first, because there were so many basic questions that needed to be answered. And then we got a really great body of literature on male career firefighters, because that's when you go into a firehouse who's sitting there, so you can collect data. The volunteers has been more of a challenge, and I think it's even more important for volunteers to be enrolled in the NFR than it is for careers. Like, obviously, I think everyone should enroll. I think you should tell all your friends to enroll, and your dad and your grandma and your mom and whoever else is involved, including people that have retired. But if you look at the key, like the linchpin for the NFR, is that you're going to give the last four of your social, because it's going to connect to state cancer registry. So if you are a volunteer firefighter, nowhere in your record is it going to be indicated that you're a volunteer firefighter. Even states, because some states will collect occupation, you aren't going to have volunteer firefighter anywhere. And so we're not including you. We're including you in general population numbers, which is probably pulling down some of our cancer relative risk pieces. But this will give the last word of social. So if you get cancer and it goes in the state registry, which it will, because every cancer diagnosed in the state goes in the state registry, it'll pull that from the state registry. The other piece is when you die, on your death certificate, it will list your occupation. If you are an active firefighter, it'll say firefighter. If you're a retired firefighter, it just says retired. And if you're a retired volunteer or an active volunteer, it says whatever your full-time job is, if it's filled in. If it's filled in, that's another big if. So this is, for volunteers, our opportunity to get them together in a data set. And I always tell people, and Rick does too, people say, well, I don't want to give the government my social security. And I'm like, I don't want it in there. They gave it to you. They already have it. You're just saying, when something happens to me, if it's cancer, when I die, they're gonna include me in this group. And so that's why it's so important for volunteers, because we'll capture a lot of the careers, right? We'll get them, and we'll, do cohort studies. We're out in their departments, but volunteers, where you're not in a database. And so if you want your cancer to count, it's literally counting your cancer if you enroll in the registry.
And just
You bring out some outstanding points, Sarah, because when we were putting this together, and you always heard, I don't have time to do this. I don't have time. If you have time to sit and watch a Buffalo Bills game, you have time to put your information into the cancer registry. It only takes a short amount of time. I did it. It took me 25 minutes. That's 25 minutes of your life that you can help yourself and other people out. And I just don't understand time. I mean, we do so many things in the world that's 25 minutes long. We can watch a football game. You can sit there and type it on your registration right on your laptop or your iPad as well. But you bring up some valuable points. Go ahead, Judy. I know you want to say something.
that is such a good point, Brian. I hear you, and I completely understand. I also think that this is somewhere where that fire department culture comes in, because I've seen volunteers where the only time they get to themselves is that football game, and then I given up that 3 hours or whatever it is. I don't want to, but if the fire department can dedicate half an hour during their monthly meeting for folks to do the NFR, that's another way to do it. So I think there are some creative ways to do this. And I know I keep coming back to that, but I always think of it as that cancer prevention and research is a partnership between researchers and the fire service, but also between firefighters and their department, right? So what ways can the fire service help firefighters be in the NFR or whatever they want to do around research? So while I really agree with you, I also think that we can think about creative ways to help folks be in this fantastic program that's going to help all of us. And to be clear, we want everyone in the NFR. If you have cancer, as Sarah said, if you don't have cancer, never had a diagnosis, if you're a new firefighter, if you've got 40 years in the volunteer service, if you're WUI, whoever you are, we want you in the NFR.
What information can help firefighters understand the importance and actionability of cancer prevention? What is going to hit home? It's not going to be the hammer on the head, but what can we do? What is the importance? What is the messages that we can get across that kind of, filters into their mind? Because, we went to the 2015, we had the National Firefighter Cancer Alliance. Then we went back 2 years later and had the second one. And boy, everybody was focusing on cancer prevention education. And it just seems to be now that that's taking a back seat. So where do we look at the entire process of saying, maybe we don't do a flavor of the month, but we look at our firefighter health issues in general and encompass the entire process and not just focus on one. But again, you all spoke today and you all mentioned how they all fit into each other. It's the piece of every puzzle. So, when do we start looking at the entire thing? And why is it that it seems that firefighter cancer has taken that back seat again? And I'll open this up to anybody who would like to speak.
I'm not sure who wrote that question, but it's a fantastic question. And I do think that people get fatigued on a certain topic after a while. And I think cancer is an issue, and I think it'll come back up. But I think that what we need to start talking about, I think one effective message is helping people understand you're not doing it for yourself. You're doing it for everyone around you. And I think, I grew up in the fire service. Dad was a fire chief when he retired. And I was thinking through, like, why do I do what I do? And really, like, I squeak out every day that I can get with my dad. Like, he wants to spend time with his grandkids. He wants to spend time with his family. I want my kids to know him. And, like, it's really easy to think of cancer like, I'll get it when I'm old, we're all going to die of something. And I hear people say that all the time. Cancer is a really ugly death. And let me tell you, from having a dad who's had both a heart attack and cancer, it's scary. And so if you're not going to do it for you and, like, oh, I'm going to die of something, if you're not going to do it for you, then do it for your kids. Do it for your grandkids. Be aware of your health for those reasons, because your grandkids want every single day they can eke out with you. So I think that's one thing. And I think that's an effective message. But I also think realizing how interrelated all these things are. And I do think there's more of a health and wellness focus in the fire service than there has been in the past. I think, like, we're at a tipping point where people are now wanting to talk, and maybe I'm a hammer, so everything's a nail, but people want to talk about health and wellness. And someone claimed I said this, but I don't think I did. I think I stole it from someone else, that a heart healthy diet is a cancer prevention diet. They're all interrelated. Like, if you start sleeping better and prioritizing your sleep, you're decreasing your risk for cancer. If you start cutting back on your alcohol use and realizing that how you might be using that for some coping, you're also benefiting your mental health. Like, it's all together. And I really think it's time we get back to basics. I think we've gone on all these different, like, what are the causes? What are it? And I'm on board, more research is always needed. More, the next greatest thing is always needed. But I think we also need to start getting back to basics about, if we talk about advanced cancer screenings, but who's getting their standard cancer screenings with a primary care doc? Who has a primary care doc? Are you talking to a primary care physician that you have a relationship with that knows what you do? Like, let's do that too. So I think I think in some ways we were a victim of our own success in talking about all these things. And it just feels so big and overwhelming sometimes that I think sometimes it's like, all right, forget it. I can't, it's just too much. So that's my thought.
And just to add to that, folks need to realize that cancer is the #1 cause of death among the firefighters, career and volunteer. And NIOSH did a great study collecting mortality rate across the board, across US, and they calculated that 70% line of duty deaths since 2016, cancer was responsible for. And overall, NIOSH did a study that firefighters are 9% greater risk of getting cancer and 14% higher risk of dying from cancer once individual is diagnosed with it. This is national statistics based on very extensive research. And, when you really understand this and you understand all the health risks, such as what puts a firefighter in a greater risk, right? And just like Sarah was saying, it's not only behavior issue, it's carcinogens such as flame retardants, plastics, synthetics, it's diesel exhaust fumes and particles. That's, where apparatus is still parked at the fire station. It's chronic overnight shifts, it's excess body weight, poor nutrition, alcohol, cumulative stress, PFAS chemicals, all add into what NIOSH reports that puts a firefighter in 9% greater risk of cancer and 14% higher risk of dying from cancer. And to understand the health risks in detail, I think is a first step into prevention. And then obviously using your internal medicine doctors or any other screenings that's available for you in your city, in your neighborhoods, in your local hospitals, or any other facilities.
Yeah, and I'd like to bring it back to also what Sarah was saying about who do you do this for, right? And so I couldn't agree more. I think the other thing people you do this for are for your fire service in your department, right? Often when we have cancer that's related to occupational risks, people get it younger than folks in the general population. And that's a horrible thing for so many reasons. Some of the risk factors that we know increase risk of cancers like obesity are, as Sarah said, higher in the volunteer fire service than the general population. These things take people out of their ability to respond in their fire department. There is a crisis of volunteerism, right? And you want to do everything you can to keep yourself healthy. And as Sarah was saying, it all, and as Ray was saying, all these factors work together. So the more you can, keep in shape and work on diet and etc., it keeps the fire service strong, right? I really think that the fire service, one of the things that I has just really pulled at my heartstrings since I've been working with the fire services is how dedicated people are and how they can get things done, right? And this to me is part of it. I think when firefighters really understand that there's things they can do and not think of it as I'm going to get this disease, I'm going to, die of a heart attack. There are things that the fire service and individual firefighters can do, which is just so great, right? This is about prevention. I think for the volunteer fire service, as we've been saying, it's particularly challenging. But I do think that pulling in this crisis of volunteerism and having people's health be part of addressing that, so that once you're in the volunteer fire service, you stay active. You can do entry, right? It's so important. So just another thought to add on to what Sarah and May was saying.
Yeah, and Sarah and I are both at the same fire department safety officer health and wellness conference right now, despite our different backgrounds on the screens. And one of the things that has me most excited about the fire service is that there is the conversation that Sarah's been talking about looking at health and wellness as a unit versus as individual. This is mental health, this is cardiac, this is cancer. And I guess the analogy I would make is it's sort of like fire ground safety, right? We get into the academy and we learn how to sound a roof and sound a floor. Those are two very, very different things, but it's still fire ground safety. And we're starting to get to the point, I think, in the fire service where health and wellness is like that one umbrella that everything else is falling under. We're not there yet, but once we get there and once we embed that kind of health and wellness umbrella in the academies and in the weekly and monthly trainings in the volunteer departments, I think we're going to start to see some real change.
And you asked what the fire service can do, and we've got some data on this, but a lot of volunteer fire departments we go to, especially the small ones, don't have somebody identified as that health and wellness person, never mind the committee. So I think that's a really important shift. And it's a hard one because, again, volunteers have a lot going on. They don't want another responsibility. But again, I think it's part of this culture shift. Sorry to interrupt you, Brian.
So many of us understand, the cancer issue. And many of you know that I am an occupational cancer survivor. When my wife and I sat across from 5 oncologists at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center back in 2015. And they did all the testing on me, stayed there a couple of days, went back after, and they told me the majority that my cancer was attributed to my job as a volunteer firefighter. It kind of wakes you up like, wow, something that I love, my volunteer service, going back and helping my community, could be killing me. And coming down with a cancer diagnosis, living away from your family for 7 weeks, going through the pain and suffering of a cancer treatment, it just kind of wakes you up. And, you try to sell that message to people. It's not an easy thing. You can prevent it, and I just wish I did a better job at it when I was a younger firefighter. So, I want
Just
to,
to add,
thank you. We're getting near that 1 hour time frame, and I don't want. Go ahead.
just to
Go ahead,
add,
Ray.
Brian, to you were saying on the global scale of things, we were supposed to, in United States, we were supposed to cure cancer back in 1971 when President Nixon came up with National Cancer Act. Well, however, 50 years later, cancer still remains undefeated. And outside of progress that was made in leukemia, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, cancer that spread to other organs are really hard to deal with for physicians and surgeons. Okay. However, the solid organ cancer, outside of maybe some complicated lung cancer, some complicated brain cancer, solid organ cancers only kills if it's already spread to other organs. So the only weapon against cancer, specifically in a high-risk population, such as firefighters, that we have is early detection, aggressive early detection, because we detect cancer early by applying all the tools, decon, visit with the doctors, behavior modifications, on-site screenings, all of the diagnostic tools or wellness tool that's available for us, including behavior modification. Obviously, we can reduce some modifiable risks and prevent cancer early as well. So I just want to throw it out there.
Great point, Ray. We're getting near that 1 hour time frame. And before we wrap up today's discussion, I can't thank each of you for the input, the information, the knowledge that you shared with us today. But I want to open it up to see if you each have some closing comments for us as well. And we can start with you, Rick. If you have any closing comments, we'd appreciate to hear them.
I would be remiss if I didn't make a shameless plug that I want everybody to sign up for the firefighter registry. And the second tier ask of that is to then become an evangelist and get everyone on your department and your academies to do it. That's such an easy thing to do. And once you've done it, you're done and you won't have to be bothered with it again. And thank you, NVFC and Brian. We appreciate this.
Thank you, Rick, for everything. Sarah, any closing comments?
Well, I always am a cheerleader for the National Firefighter Registry. So do what Rick says. Ask 10 of your friends to do it too, and including retirees. So I think that's my first one. But the second one is, I would say, we have come so far. Sometimes it gets discouraging and it feels like, oh my God, this is this uphill battle, and what are we going to do? I'd like to point out that on whatever day today is, Wednesday afternoon, 50 people signed up to jump on. Brian, the team at NVFC said, let's do it. Let's do a webinar on cancer. Let's get experts together to talk about it. And we're having this conversation. 10 years ago, that would not have happened. The webinar wouldn't have been planned and no one would have shown up for it, even if it was. 10 years ago, when I would go in and do a talk, 2 people would show up in the room. Today, rooms are packed. And it's not because of my fantastic personality. It's because people care. So we're making progress. We are going we're so much farther ahead than we were. We know so much more than we do. We know how to prevent. We know how to early detect. There's education, there's tools or resources. So as I just want to leave everyone on a positive note about, like, this is our moment. We got to keep pushing forward. We're making progress. We just got to keep going with it. Woo! And I'm done.
Great point. And make sure you two use sunscreen while you're in Phoenix, by the way. Judy,
Thank you so much, Brian, and thank you and to the NBFC for your ongoing work on cancer prevention. The Lavender Ribbon Report, as we said before, it's such an iconic document. I know there's a work that you're working on eventually a revision of it, but it's this great document that talks about this, a question in the chat that says, what causes cancer for firefighters? And that document gets at kind of what the causes are, but how to prevent them, right? So we know that firefighters are exposed to cancer-causing chemicals at work. We know that, as Sarah said, in their work, they have increased exposure to some of these behavioral factors because of the stress of the job and the way the job is functioning, and that they have to be these high-performance athletes. So my final word, and I think it dovetails with everything that Sarah and Rick said, and yes, NFR, please join, is cancer is preventable. And the fire service can work together to move us as we've come so far, to keep moving us forward, right? And firefighters are not destined to die of cancer. They're not destined to die of a heart attack, but they're firefighters so they can get things done. And we have the tools to reduce exposure and reduce our cancer rates. And that's my final thought. And thank you again to the NBFC.
thank you, Judy, and I'm sure we'll see you next month in Miami. Ray, closing
Thank
comment.
you. Yep. Thank you, NVAC, for having us, from having UGS team here. And I want to reinforce what Ricky, Sarah, and Judy saying. Please sign up for National Registry. This research really helps and very important for volunteer firefighters. But my message is this: there's absolutely nobody should be dying of cancer being a volunteer firefighter. Okay, there's preventive screenings that's available to be delivered on site to every department in the nation. Our mission is to make the screenings available for every department in the nation. Solid organ tumor only killed would spread to other organs. And two of the volunteer department in New York State that onboarded the services have benefited tremendously, and that's West Islip and Bohemia. Benefited tremendously from early detection, specifically from very first screening. Two of the early stage cancer was detected. So very available, and my message is together we can make sure that none of the firefighters are facing stage 3, stage 4 cancer.
Thank you so much, Ray. And, thank you to all of our panelists. I know you've taken an hour out of your busy time, and I can't thank Judy, Ray, Rick, and Sarah so much for joining us today. And a special thank you again to Ray and our friends at UDS for partnering with us today to host this webinar and joining in on our conversation. And again, I echo, please, if you have time and you make time, it's worth the 25 minutes of your life the next time you watch the Buffalo Bills game to make sure you fill out your cancer registry form. Thank you so much. Love y'all. Stay safe and have a great day.